"60 years of pioneering leadership. That's the story of ABHOW, a story that involves all of us, residents, board members, staff, even former staff like myself. I'm Daniel Preifogel, and I was ABHOW's Director of Communications in the 1990s. I thought I left this company about a decade ago, but today I find I'm as busy as ever working for ABHOW as a consultant. As they say, no one ever leaves ABHOW. We stay, and the company stays with us because there's something about ABHOW's story. It inspires us, it shapes us, it endures. In other words, the story has staying power. These three know the power of this story. Gordon Bodemiller, son of ABHOW's first executive, the Reverend Harold E. Bodemiller. Dr. Richard E. Ice, President Emeritus. And David B. Ferguson, current President and CEO. Over the next hour, through a conversational interview, we'll hear from these three as they tell the story of ABHOW's 60 years of pioneering leadership. Gentlemen, let's start at the very beginning. I want to hear how you first became connected with ABHOW, and Gordon, we'll start with you.
Well, why don't we start right at 1949, 60 years ago. Dad was living in Phoenix, Arizona, pastor of a church. I was a member of that church, and my wife was too. We had become acquainted earlier, but in 1949, Dad performed a ceremony uniting the two of us. So this is our 60th anniversary also. So it was very fitting when we received a letter asking us to come and be a part of this great celebration. But the funny thing happened after Dad performed that ceremony. He disappeared from the Arizona scene. I don't know if there was any relationship or not between the marriage ceremony and his going, but he came to Northern California. I say came, this isn't Northern California, but he came to the ABHOW origins in Northern California at the invitation of Dr. Reuben Olson. And it was at that time that they were strongly in the process of developing Pilgrim Haven, They had started at 375 Bellevue Avenue in Oakland, but it was deemed that that building was not adequate or proper for a retirement home because the cost of converting it was would cost more than the building was worth. But there again, I got in onto some of the ground floor because Lois and I moved to Berkeley, the Bay Area, in 1950, and I got in on the remodeling of that building that was supposed to be the first retirement community. So I was a part of it also. But the important thing is we were there for 4 years during the beginning of ABHOW, and we went around with Dad, went down the peninsula to Pilgrim Haven, and were very close to Dad through all of that period of time. Dad himself had the reputation of a builder. He built new edifices, new additions to a number of American Baptist churches, basically in Northern California, but that was also a part of his job at the Emmanuel Baptist Church in Phoenix. And so he had a reputation as innovative, a builder, and I'm not sure if that was why he was called to Northern California or not, but it was for church extension work. And then shortly after he got there, though, the Pilgrim Haven board was organized, and Dad was assigned half-time to Pilgrim Haven, the development, the drawing up of a master plan. I think it was Anderson, the architect at the time, that Dad worked with, and half-time with the convention. So it was his introduction to the retirement communities. And it was our privilege, my wife and myself, to be able to follow along with him and Mom as they worked to develop Pilgrim Haven. And then there were various connections there at Pilgrim Haven with Dad being on, administrator, and then he left to go to Sunnyvale and another building project, the First Baptist Church there, and then back as administrator to Pilgrim Haven. And then we see a number of, growths that came along that finally resulted in the organization of the organization we know today as ABHOW.
That's great, Gordon. That's great. We're going to come back to your story.
All right.
Thank you. Dick, how did you first connect with ABHOW?
In the middle 60s, I was serving as Associate Executive Minister and Chief Financial Officer of American Baptist Churches of the West, based in Oakland. Harold Bodemiller was attending some of our staff meetings and was co-opted by our Executive Minister, Dr. Orr, for presence at the staff meetings, and we obviously were aware of the incorporation change from Pilgrim Haven to American Baptist Homes. In the second year that I was there, they began seeking a way to finance the founding and building of San Joaquin Gardens in Fresno and Grand Lake Gardens in Oakland, and some modest addition to Pilgrim Haven. Harold Bodemiller was busy negotiating a $5 million loan with the help of national ministries of our denomination. And as we put the loan package together, the region, American Baptist region, had to come in and join in the collateral support of that $5 million loan for the first 2 homes. And I was the staff member who was involved in arranging that collateral support and the financing for those 2 homes, and became well acquainted with Harold Bodemiller and Richard Scott, who was serving on the board at the time.
And then you joined the board before becoming CEO, right?
Yes. In 1967, I went back to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, to serve the next 5 years as the Deputy Executive Minister of National Ministries. And in that capacity, we were forming corporations to develop retirement communities in that era. And the American Baptist Service Corporation was formed and was one of the agencies that reported to me. And we founded and financed retirement communities in New Jersey, Florida, Illinois, Missouri, as well as Valley Verde and Orangewood in that 5-year period. In 1970, Harold Bottomiller knew that I was involved in those operations and invited me to join the ABHAL board, which I did. And then it was 2 years later, at the retirement of Harold, that Dick Scott and the search committee approached me on becoming the president of ABHAL, and that involvement was after the 2 years on the board.
Thank you, Dick. Dave, how about you? How did you first connect with ABHAL?
Well, I got a call from an executive search firm. And they said, we have an opportunity in Northern California. It's a non-for-profit organization. It's been in business. I said, oh, that's got to be ABHAL. They said, oh, no, we can't tell you who it is. You can't know that. And then finally admitted, okay, well, Dr. Ice is thinking of retiring. And so happened that the American Association of Homes and Services for the Aging had its national conference in San Francisco. And they said, if you're going to that, why not just set up an interview with some folks? So I did. And I was introduced to Dick Ice and Ron Adams. And that's how they introduced them to me. And in the course of this interview, Dick will remember, I had worked in a faith-based organization before, and I said something to the effect that one of the things I didn't want to ever do again is work with a bunch of ministers who didn't want to be ministers anymore. And those of you that knew Ron Adams, this radio voice said, well, Dave, let me introduce you to Reverend Ice and myself, Reverend Ron Adams. So I figured that was the end of that interview. But it apparently went pretty well, and we ended up being offered the job and moved to Northern California.
All right, thank you. Gordon, your father served as ABHAL's executive director from 1964 to 1972. Prior to that, he served in several capacities at Pilgrim Haven. What were the peak moments for ABHAL during that period?
Well, of course, the founding of Pilgrim Haven would be paramount, but with the development of the board and Dad serving as administrator, so more or less head of the board, there was a moment when he approached the board with 10 concerns that he felt were the concerns of the elderly that they were concentrating on, trying to develop a home, trying to develop a program. And I would like to just mention those 10 concerns here as Mary Parker Brunton has put them in her book, The Mid-Century Adventure. The primary element was not to do something for the residents, but to do something with them. Wanted to get away from this nursing home image. And so he presented to the board these 10 concerns that the elderly have, that he had observed. And the first one is an overarching need for security. The physical security of building a home, a residence, something where they would feel secure, as well as a financial security. And the second one, an increasing desire to be a whole person for as long as one lives. That there would be no pushing off to a side, putting into a bed and leaving there and things like that. But to help the person be whole in their advancing years. Then the third one, the problem of aloneness, that you can even live in a household as an elderly person, but you don't have too much to do with your family there. They kind of shunt you off to the side. That could be one scenario, but there are others that you can well imagine also. And the idea of aloneness. And so they wanted to develop a family atmosphere in whatever residence they were going to come up with. And the fourth one, a need in maintaining their own dignity and their independence. They are rejecting having things done for them which they themselves could do. And I have a personal experience that I would like to relate that to here as we moved into the terraces of Phoenix. It was impressed upon me that we have a maintenance staff, totally adequate, and that we were to call on them for things that needed to be done. Well, I've always been a handyman. Of course, being in Congo for many, many years, you had to do your own thing. You didn't just pick up the phone and call a plumber when you needed some plumbing done. You started digging the cesspool or whatever it was, and that's been a part of my life. And I learned a lot of that from Dad. But when they told me, no, you don't need that, I had a garage full of tools. Get rid of them. Well, I'll tell you something. I have replaced a number of those tools since I moved into the terraces because I still want to do some things. And they permitted me to do it. They are permitting me to do it. So this idea of maintaining their own dignity and independence really hit home to me as I moved into one of the residences. The fifth one is a financial stability. On a limited income, the thing that Dad was trying to impress on the board was we've got to make it possible for them to stay here regardless of what their finances turn out to be in the future. The sixth one, health, is one of their chief concerns. The seventh, the availability of care and proper housing follows on the heels of this health concern. Number 8, one of the greatest fears of any individual is the fear of losing one's mind. Senility is a dreaded word. In a protected situation, cared for with love and understanding, a senile or disoriented individual can live happily. And it was very heartening to me to come to this meeting and discover for the first time, because we had not used the term at the terraces, the Grove. And we have the Grove at the terraces. I knew what the establishment was, what part of the community was set apart for that particular thing, but I didn't know it was called the Grove and that it was available to all of the communities, or going to be available to all of the communities of Abhow. A sense of belonging and being needed. The idea of various committees and boards. Lois and I do serve on the interdenominational board there at the terraces, overseeing the religious needs of the people, whether they be Catholic or Baptist or, well, whatever. We have Jewish people there, and we have others. It's a wonderful thing to be a part of that community. And then the 10th one, an essential relationship in life is to know that someone cares. And again, referring to our own personal experience at the terraces, that very definitely is a part of it. I've had a couple of occasions for medical treatment, but not something that needed to be cared for in a hospital, but end up going to a doctor or something. And always follow up, always follow up. We contact the resident wellness nurse first, and she makes a recommendation, and then we follow up on that. But she is right there to come back and follow up on how we are faring from that particular thing. So I think these 10 concerns were perhaps one of the greatest things that Dad did in the development of retirement community, and that has been carried out through all of Abtao, all of the Abhow, all of the homes, and everything of that nature.
Those 10 concerns led to the articulation of a philosophy of care into the continuum of care that Abhow
yes, that's
eventually
right.
pursued.
The 4 levels of care come from these 10 concerns.
That's amazing. I'm just really struck by how relevant that language is today, and how much, 50 years later, that Abhow continues to live into the reality that your father laid out so many years ago. Briefly, Gordon, say a little bit about your father's involvement in the state and national associations.
Well, as I recall it, there were various, for the state, there were various departments in the state government dealing with various parts of, especially aging individuals. But Dad had the concept of combining those into one organization that would have an overall concern, and it became the CAHA, California Association for Housing for the Homes for the Aging.
Known today as Aging Services of California.
Right. Yeah, and then also he moved into the national area. He was involved with a presidential commission at the White House, which resulted in a national organization. Dad served as president of the California organization, I believe twice, and he was a secretary for the national organization.
The American Association of Homes and Services for the
Yes,
Aging. Right.
right.
Dick, you...
Harold was actually a founder of both of those
Yes,
bodies.
that's right.
So our organization is older, but it was founding both the California and the national bodies.
Well, they developed something with the organization, started at Pilgrim Haven and expanded, something that Dad was eager to see spread out. He didn't want to keep what they had developed to themselves. He wanted it to be spread out to other places, and so have standards established that would be available to everyone else, and that they would have to adhere to within the state of California, and then finally nationally.
That's wonderful. Dick, I seem to recall something about a taxi ride that had something to do with that story.
The California group originally incorporated as the American Association of Homes for the Aging. They were 3 or 4 years old when Harold was involved in meetings that led to the national organization being founded, and the California group relinquished its name to the American Association of Homes for the Aging and took back the California title. But Harold more than once told me the story of being in a taxi cab with Judge Thomas Jenkins and another one of our state executives, and conceiving of the idea of the American Association of Homes for the Aging. And the 3 of them became part of the founding group at that beginning, which was in the late 60s.
Wow, brilliance in the back of a taxi cab. That's
Yes.
great. All right. Dick, you served as president and CEO from 1972 to 1995. What milestones did Abhow achieve during this period?
After Dick Scott convinced me that being president of Abhow would be a position not necessarily involved administrative of home background. I didn't have an administrator's license. I had no experience in administering homes. He convinced me that we had the licensed, trained, competent, quality people to do that. But what ABHOW was needing at that moment was someone who knew how to do the financing for retirement communities. We were breaking ground in Rosewood with a construction loan and no takeout loan. And the vision for ABHOW for the next decade at least was the building and financing of several homes. They thought I would bring that competence to the position. So driving across the Mojave Desert with my family from the trip from Pennsylvania, and we came through Needles, and I said to my wife, I think we better stop in Bakersfield. I think we're building a building there. And we did stop at the Rosewood site. And true, it was already graded. It was graded and the foundation preparations were beginning. And so I moved my family to the Oakland area, and one of my first tasks was finding financing for Rosewood for the long term. 1974 was the 25th anniversary of ABHOW. And we made big plans for a big celebration at Pilgrim Haven under the oak tree that's now gone, but it was an enormous oak tree, and our audience sat out under the oak tree, and we'd set up everything outside, and we planned a very glorious 25th anniversary celebration, partly to advertise the growth and the presence of ABHOW in the community. I had met a gentleman down at Judson Terrace in San Luis Obispo whose name was Blair, and I learned that his father was NBC anchorman, Frank Blair, and he was on NBC at the time that Huntley Brinkley were on, and he did the anchoring on Saturdays and Sundays in the fill-ins. And so I got the phone number from Mr. Blair, and I called Frank Blair in New York, asked him to be our 25th anniversary speaker, and he agreed, and I think he thought the plane ticket we gave him would give him a chance to come out and see his father. And so Frank came, and as we sat on the platform getting ready for the message that he was to bring, I became aware that Frank had enjoyed the fruits of the minibar. To a considerable degree. And as I sat next to him, I said, where are we going to come out today? What's going to happen next? But amazingly, at the time, Frank Blair turned into the professional that he was. You don't get to be an NBC anchorman. And he was able to deliver a thought-out, careful address, and carefully sat down afterward. And we came through that incident without much harm, but with a lot of apprehension on the part of the president. Soon after that was the expansion of Piedmont Gardens. It was a tough project because we were going to build a 17-story tower in the garden terrace, and we had one recalcitrant landowner on the site that we needed. And it was, believe me, a tough negotiation to get that last piece of land that we needed for Piedmont Gardens. And I think the phrase "great bodily harm" entered the negotiations. But we finally did get all of the properties necessary, and we were able to finance with the Service Corporation the building of Piedmont Gardens, Garden Terrace, and Crestmont. That was followed upon by a number of corporate acquisitions, and we really did that by acquisition by merger. And in the next several years, we acquired Valley Verde in Santa Barbara. We acquired Judson Park here in Seattle after 3 years of being the managing partner. We acquired Plymouth Village of Redlands, and we acquired Orangewood in Phoenix. All of those required a lot of negotiation with boards, and a lot of negotiation with lenders and the assumption of debt and all of those acquisitions. So a major growth of our corporation's CCRCs came by those 4 acquisitions.
May I just, talking about Orangewood, of course that's where we live now. It has become the Terraces. But Lois and I had a very early acquaintanceship with Orangewood because we had a pastorate after we left seminary. We had a pastorate in Arizona during the formative years, the very first years of Orangewood. And then after we retired, I was asked to serve on the board of Orangewood, which I did for 3 years, but it was just after I left that they changed to the terraces. And actually it was during those 3 years on the board that they started to renovate the territory, the plant there at Orangewood. From single-story garden apartments, little clusters of 1 and 2 bedroom homes, to multi-story, one 3-story building and several 2-story buildings that are located there now. And so it's just a part of our relationship to the growth that is evident in Abhow from those beginning years. And as Dick here says, the acquisition, Orangewood was established back in the 50s. And
62, in fact, actually. 62.
Well, yeah, that's when the first residents moved in, but the workings on it went back into the 50s.
Right.
But anyway, yes, the first residents moved in 62. And so it's been another part of that growth. And I wonder if I could interject one other thing. You know, I talked about the 10 points, the 10 concerns that Dad had. I wonder what in the world he would think today when we heard, was it Wednesday, the awards luncheon of the accreditation. How many points did we have to conform to in order to get this accreditation? Something over 8,000? I'm telling you, from 10 to 8,000. Granted, what Dad was doing encompassed a lot more than 10.
You know who you can blame for that? Why don't you tell them about your involvement in starting that?
Well, I'm guilty because the 4 retirement communities that were acquired, all Judson Park and Valley Verde and Orangewood, Plymouth Village, all of them became difficult to operate and became somewhat insolvent because of one thing, a type of life care contract into which they entered with their earliest residents. It was common in those days of low inflation to enter into life care contracts. All of them ran out of the ability to service their debt, and they turned to Abhow for acquisition because Harold Bottomiller never wrote life care contracts. He wrote continuing care contracts that were changeable and workable, and so our corporation had the assets and the strength to acquire these 4. But the next thing that I embarked on after that was the fact that another executive and I, his name was Lloyd Lewis, and he was in charge of all of the Quaker retirement communities known as the Kendall Organization in southeastern Pennsylvania. And at 2 consecutive ASA meetings, Lloyd Lewis and I sat together and in his room and in mine and others, and we conceived the idea of the Continuing Care Accreditation Commission. We invited 4 or 5 other executives of multi-homes, and together we formed the CCAC and established all of the initial criteria. It wasn't 8,000 then, it was like 40, but we established the CCAC, and I served on the board with Lloyd and others for the next 8 or 9 years of the CCAC. And so Abhow, like being involved in the initial formation of associations, we were involved in CCAC being born.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Much of your tenure in the 1980s was marked by your work on Pacific Meadows and the terraces of Los Gatos.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I want to make an interlude there to the fact that in addition to founding these organizations, members of the Abhow executive team, the senior people, were involved at every level of ASA and CASA. We've had a number of our executives who've been president of the State Association and the National Association. And so ABHOW is regarded as probably the preeminent member of those associations because of all of our involvements. Later in my tenure at ABHOW, we got involved in the building of the terraces of Los Gatos. And I met with a board of Presbyterian people from the Los Gatos Presbyterian Church who had been working on the acquisition of a site and a project for some 10 years. They had not been able to move forward. They had to get the Presbyterian homes to help them. We decided, after abandoning our efforts in Santa Rosa, to join forces with the Presbyterian Church of Los Gatos in trying to establish a CCRC there. Little did I know that it would take 10 more years in meeting with principally the civil government authorities, the Planning Commission, who had all kinds of problems with our project, the City Council, the Environmental Impact Report, and so forth. Our first set of plans that was getting ready for review by the Planning Commission in the town of Los Gatos had a clock tower at the entrance, a beautiful little open clock tower with a clock up in the top, and we thought that would be an imaginative entrance to the terraces. Well, the Planning Commission told Ken Hoagie, our director of projects, that that clock tower simply wasn't part of the culture of Los Gatos. It just wouldn't fit. The next meeting, Ken had a slideshow that he showed the Planning Commission, and it was pictures of 25 clock towers in the town of Los Gatos. They were not happy about that.
They were not happy.
We didn't get the clock tower, but that 10 years resulted in the building of the terraces of Los Gatos. The very last meeting at the approval by the City Council, one resident was so concerned about the height of this three-story building was going to cut off his view of the nearby hill. And so one of the council members voted that we should lower the whole project, the whole 3-acre thing should be lowered 1 foot into the earth. Well, we knew we could do it, but it was going to be expensive. And then it turned out when that hit the newspaper that we were going to have to excavate another 12 inches of earth out of all of that site. Several of the other neighbors came to the next council meeting to object to the amount of dust, dirt, and all the hauling and everything that was going to happen. So
one challenge after another.
One after another.
And one of the things I was on board by then, and they did end up lowering the building in one corner.
Yeah.
And that lowering changed the internal way the building was put together so that vents and various chimneys and things that were on the inside of the roof line, not visible from the street, ended up, when it was built, being on the outside so you could see them from the street. And we were presented with pictures of up and down. We do not allow this in Los Gatos. So they then made us bundle them and add fake chimneys. So if you go to the terraces, you'll see these fake chimneys on the outside. And that at that time was about $150,000 additional cost, right, which we didn't have. But we had to do it, made it happen.
Dan, simultaneous to that project, we were going through a lot of trouble in trying to acquire and finance Pacific Meadows down in Carmel Valley. That site became available because the famous movie actors James Garner and Clint Eastwood and his wife had owned the site. It was several hundred acres, but they couldn't get a water permit to use it. So they gave it to the county of Monterey, who looked around for a nonprofit sponsor, and we were able, with the county's assistance, to get the water that we need to build Pacific Meadows. But I must say that being the first tax credit project in the state of California that we know of with state tax credits, every attorney that we had in this project was learning what to do and how to manage tax credit financings. And at one time, there were 12 law firms and 24 attorneys involved in writing the documentation and the financing and all the banks and the attorneys for the tax credit purchasers. I think there were 24 attorneys at one of the meetings before we were through, and the legal costs for Pacific Meadows came up to about $800,000, about 25% of the cost of the project before we got it finished. But there it is, and it has a great place in Carmel Valley.
Wonderful.
That was about as I was ending my 23 years tenure and turning the tasks over to David.
Dave, you arrived in 1992 as Executive Vice President, then became President and CEO in 1995. As you look back at this period, what stands out for you?
Well, certainly completing the terraces of Los Gatos and having the experience of learning about tax credits and that financing done in Pacific Meadows. The real thing there was to finally achieve financial stability, which we've reached over the past 5 or 6 years, I guess. It's been a long haul. And we have had a goal that we wanted to take an organization without reserves and without operating margin that could barely fund capital expenses to one that had reserves and could fund capital, fund depreciation. Sounding very business-like here, I guess, but it is a big business, right?
Yes.
And we did that while keeping the rate increases at we think, nominal levels. And we always have discussions with residents about what's nominal or not.
Yeah.
We did that. The redevelopment of all our campuses has become really important, and Orangewood was one of those that we said we found a Chevy. It was a '57 Chevy, and it was a little rusted out, and we thought if we could just polish it up and rechrome it and put new leather seats in, we would have a classic. And then we realized we'd have a 1957 classic Chevrolet in 2005, and maybe that wasn't what the market wanted. So that resulted in the moving around, and I remember in one of the meetings we had to, so we found out how flexible residents are and how interesting and neat people they are and what their life stories are. We were at a meeting in the chapel there, and we said, here's our idea, and we're going to tear down 2 ends of the campus, and you'll have to move, and but we're going to work on this. And this lady stood up, and I think she was well over 95, and got a hold of the microphone, which is always dangerous, and started off saying, I've had to move 11 times in my life. And I was like, oh, get the microphone back. And her husband was a pastor, so they moved around a lot. She says, what I've learned is if you view each move as an adventure, you're going to get new friends, you're going to get new views, and you might get some new granite countertops. It'll be really special. And so that set the whole tone for there, because that turned the resident population towards thinking in a positive way of what could become out of Orangewood. So that was a fun step. And now we've seen Judson Park. That was a fun project to conceive and be a part of. And now San Joaquin Gardens being developed, and I got a series of emails while I was here this week. The first one saying that Valley Verde is once again delayed. I got one this morning that says we're back on the commission hearing it March 5th. So we're praying people. So what I need you to do is pray for the right decision, whatever that is. We think we know, but that the commission would do the right thing for Valley Verde and we can proceed there. Some other things that were new was Dick and I were reminiscing that when he mentioned Marv Phillips as the CFO, going from manual to computerization. That computerization in those days was something called a data general mainframe, which took up an entire room that had to be air conditioned. Took 2 guys to make it run, and it produced reams and boxes of 11 by 7, what was it, 15 by 17, those big green sheets of paper that went on there. And we had a task force back then. I think Bruce was on it, and Dr. Sue Roderick, among others maybe that are here, that looked at the future and said, the future is technology. And it's not this big piece of equipment. It's going to end up on people's desks. And we predict the day when your department heads are all going to be connected together and have PCs and laptops and all this kind of thing, and laid out a plan for ABHOW to try to follow, which we implemented. And today, we were ahead of most of our peers, but certainly still leading the way in technology. And now new systems and programs that come because of that, growing sophistication of information technology. Point-click care which is an automated charting system that connects supplies and patient's care. And I think when Steve Witchek was here, we started that, and he said something like it was, when fully implemented, would save 2 hours a day of nursing time to do actual hands-on nursing versus having to chart. So we've done that. The Grove, certainly, Posit Science, Brain Fitness, now Masterpiece Living, the My Choice Dining program. These things aren't rolled out without hiccups, but for the most part, they've been are being very successful. So we're happy with that. I'd have to say a challenge that has worked out well is the formation of Seniority. It's now producing profits for us, but where that came from goes back to the Terraces of Los Gatos. We didn't have a Seniority, we had ourselves, and we used the consulting with Joe Anderson from Dallas, where he was part of advertising and public relations and marketing firm. And when we finally got the Terraces solved and filled, the phone began to ring, and people would say, well, how did you do that? And would you come do it for us? And we thought, well, sure, if it's going to bring in some extra money, maybe we should. But then we found out that in the state of California, the Attorney General does not want not-for-profits unfairly competing by having a tax advantage. So you have to be really careful that whatever you do as a for-profit that might be taxable, that you do it as a for-profit. So we thought the easiest thing to do would be to form a for-profit company. So that's where Seniority came from. Another thing that was, I think, a milestone for us was the formation of Cornerstone Affiliates. And that's a technique that allows financings to happen off of ABHOW's balance sheet. It makes it easier for current residents to look at ABHOW and understand our performance as opposed to the larger thing. So it's, I think it was covered in orientation for new people there. I won't go into the complexities right now about that. And also the expansion of affordable housing. Pretty proud of building on what was there before. And Ansel told me that since I came on board, that the staff has raised $81 million in government funding for these programs. So.
ABHOW's mission is to enhance the independence, well-being, and security of older people through the provision of housing, health care, and supportive services. As you three reflect on ABHOW's 60 years, when was the company most faithful to its mission? Gordon, we'll start with you.
I believe it was with the formation of the foundation. There was a gift that was made possible somewhat with that idea in mind to assure the well-being of those who were on limited funds and even running out of funds. And you know...
Yeah, the gift came from Mr. Edwin Ewell of Vacaville,
Yeah.
who incidentally was one of the developers of Lake Berryessa. But he came into Harold's office one day in his overalls and said that he was unhappy with all of the street demonstrations on Telegraph Avenue, and he wanted to take the University of California out of his will and give it to somebody else. And so formed a friendship between your father and Edwin Ewell, which led, because of that gift, to the formation and incorporation of the foundation.
Right. Mm-hmm. But I think that was really one of the high points of Dad's tenure in office, the formation of the foundation to continue what was at the beginning, primarily a residence for retired ministers and missionaries and their wives, and then it grew well beyond that, of course, through the years with ABHOW. But the foundation is there, and I know from personal experience, friends of mine who have, should I say, profited from the foundation, that the things have, they've been able to come into the one of the residences, or they've profited, not, I hope the term profit doesn't mean they've gained something, but they've been able to maintain their lifestyle in the residence where they are located because of the foundation, because of the help that they receive.
The foundation has essentially helped the company keep that promise of continuing
Yes,
care.
that's right. And then the other high point, or being faithful to the origins of ABHOW, is the expansion. The fact that Pilgrim Haven wasn't allowed to be the only residence, but just moved out beyond that with, well, you had the Pilgrim Haven Corporation, and then lo and behold, here came San Joaquin Gardens and Grand Lake Gardens. How can we call them a part of the Pilgrim Haven Corporation? So the name was enlarged to Northern California Homes and Hospitals, the Baptist thing,
American Baptist Homes, yeah.
American Baptist, which was large, it enclosed a larger area. And then there came the movement to San Luis Obispo, the affordable housing with Paul Ray. I can remember going down there one time with Dad when negotiations were going on. And, you know, San Luis Obispo is not in Northern California Baptist territory. And so something had to be changed again, and that resulted in American Baptist Homes of the West, which included also Arizona,
right,
and Honolulu, and so on. It became a much wider thing. But this was the vision that Dad had. He was a visionary, and I know that he would be very, if I may use the term, proud, not from personal accomplishment, but out of what has come out of what they started with Pilgrim Haven, just the ABHOW as it is today, and it's still growing as Dad would want it.
Right.
So that's, I'm sure, is the way that Dad would look at it today.
Dick, as you look back, when was ABHOW most faithful to its mission?
After World War II, from the founding of Pilgrim Haven in '49, the continuing care concept was new. The concept of having independent living and assisted living in its various formations, and skilled nursing and dementia care, putting that all together on one campus was fairly new. And ABHOW was one of the earliest proponents of continuing care, and it was a lifetime theme of Harold. He believed thoroughly in continuing care, having all of those services on the same campus, short of acute care hospitalization. And I found that theme when I arrived as president, and it carried us through all the ensuing years when we had opportunities, many of them, to acquire freestanding nursing homes, freestanding assisted living, freestanding hospitals even. But we stepped back and said, where our business is providing a continuum in one place for older people to get the services they need through the remaining years of their life, all in one place. So that was faithfulness to that part of the mission. I would second your comment about San Luis Obispo by saying the venture of ABHOW into affordable housing then came in about 1971 and 72 as new legislation at the end of the Lyndon Johnson presidency. HUD received all of this authority to make low-interest loans and rent subsidy available to elderly people. So ABHOW was one of the earliest organizations to move into low venture capital affordable housing with 40-year low-interest loans. And we started, as I came to ABHOW, we were in construction at San Luis Obispo and at Bellflower, at Riverside.
Mount Rubidoux Manor.
Mount Rubidoux Manor in Riverside. Those two were under construction, and Bellflower Friendship came soon thereafter. And we went on into Carmel Valley and the other places, particularly Allen Temple Arms used our services for management and continues today. and all 4 of its units. Allen Temple Arms was part of that venture into affordable housing. That was being true to our mission to be able to serve people of low, moderate income. I remember at Riverside when we had the dedication, they introduced two residents who had moved in from sleeping in their cars. This was the kind of service that we were starting to offer people in affordable housing. The third thing about being faithful to their mission is I would have to say that the fact that the foundation grew from when I came about $500,000 was all we had, most of it from Pilgrim Haven Endowment. And when I left, it was over $40 million. So the growth of the foundation was quite spectacular in those years. And I can't conclude without making reference to one individual who was formative in all of those years, Mr. Roy E. Hughes, who is alive today. Mr. Hughes was chairman of this board for 18 years of my presidency, 18 of the 23 years. He was, as a layman, the executive vice president of Kaiser Industries, which included at that time all of Kaiser Hospitals, Kaiser Steel, Kaiser Aluminum, Kaiser Bridge Building, Kaiser Shipbuilding, everything. Roy was the executive vice president of all of that and was, a very busy man, but he gave 18 years of service as a friend and counselor to me. I talked to him most every week. But Roy E. Hughes is a man that we must really praise and be proud of for all of those years of service when I was president.
It reminds me that, of course, I knew Roy, and when it was time for Dick to say, I'm leaving and you need to develop a relationship with Roy, he said, I suggest you go to Harvard, to a month-long nonprofit executive school, and call Roy, because the part of the program was you have to go the first week and the last weekend that your board chair has to go with you. So I said, well, I'm not sure that I want to have one chair. I think maybe I want a rotating chair. Dick said, no, I think you'll be unhappy with that decision. And so I called Roy, and he said, well, actually, because of his age, and he said, because you're new, I think you ought to find your chair. And it's not that I don't want to go with you, it's just I think you should find the next chair. And again, I said, well, I really don't see that. I see a rotating chair and bring in new ideas all the time in this. And he says, I think you'll be unhappy with that decision. So, not unhappy with our first 2 chairs, Lois Thomas and Ed Levesque. And then along came Randy Stamper. And I think I found my chair for the 20 years.
Yeah.
Dave, as you look back at your tenure, when has ABHOW been most faithful to its mission?
Well, we get reminded of it by the board all the time, and so I think there's a lot to look at. But a couple of things that's really stand out for me, and the first one would be that we were the first in the state of California, and maybe the country, to involve residents in governance. And that started with some conversations really with Art Chrisman, who was on the resident council and would meet and wrote me 14-page single line item hand-printed letters suggesting I look at line 27 on paragraph C of financial statements. Yeah. And that relationship has led to others trying to copy it, and the state of California passed legislation, some of you may know, but they require 1 representative from residents for every 3 communities for a multi-facility operation. Of course, we have 1 from everyone, so we're ahead of that. And I think that involvement ties back to what your father wrote, that you do with residents, not for residents. Although some residents say we do it to them. Once a year. Another big thing is what we've celebrated here, but not only have we been involved with CCAC and now CARF for 20 years, but the last 2 surveys, I hate to use this word, it says near perfect, and okay, we missed 30-some points out of that whole thing. They're as near to perfect as you can get, and that demonstrates a real commitment to our mission and a high point for ABHOW, I think.
Dave, you 3 have shared with us the rich history of ABHOW. Where is the company headed in the future?
If you'd asked me that last October, I'd have had a different answer. We believe it's focused on growth, and it's growth because of not just to grow, but because, again, as your dad said, to share. If we do something well, honor our fathers and mothers. If we know how to do that, we ought to be doing that everywhere. So redevelopment, repositioning of all of our campuses, I think, is going to be essential. We're going to do that, though, without risking the financial stability of the organization or the residents' security. Resident satisfaction is a big area. Jeff Glaze, head of operations, will tell you that is the focus of just about everything we try to do. Along with employee satisfaction. It's harder and harder to get good people and to see the fellow that came up here with 14 years and speak from his heart. That's, how do you find that? You know, that'll be, so, and person-centered care. The new words are perhaps a jargon almost, but person-centered care is really, was exemplified in the video yesterday about the Grove, and that's if somebody wakes up in the middle of the night and they want breakfast or they want to bake cookies, that's what you do. You don't do it because we're baking cookies at 3 o'clock on the schedule, and at 5 o'clock we're gonna do knitting or whatever it is. It's all about the person. So we're involved, Russell Mock is involved in studying new concepts of how you build nursing homes. And what I think you'll see in the future is you won't ever see again a traditional cross-shaped building with a nursing center. And what you'll see are small cottages, everyone in a private room, off of a living area where they live together with staff. There are lots of names for these kinds of things. One is called the greenhouse model. We're looking for a name for ours because we're not copying them necessarily, and we have our own. So Jeff, in this meeting, has been coming up to me regularly. How about? And he has another name. So that's what we'll see, I think, in the future.
Resident engagement, person-centered care. This kind of language sounds awful lot like the philosophy that Harold Bottomiller proposed more than 50 years ago. To move from doing things for residents to doing things with residents. Which brings me to my final question for you, Dave. How is the future that you articulated related to ABHOU's past?
Well, I think it's true to that mission and those 10 points, and I had not read them. I'll tell you, I'm glad you brought them up. They were sitting there in that book, part of our history, but I hear it at board meetings all the time. Those words are said by directors and by staff. Certainly Don Burgess would be one to hold up the American Baptist heritage and our Christian faith-based approach. And I would tell a story that I've told to some many times in closing, but I have to tie it to last night and tell you that the good times are not over for good. The best is, I hope, yet to come. But after I'd been named president, and we knew Dick was retiring, and there were some anniversaries, Harold Bottomiller called me and said, I want you to come down, visit me at Moberg Cottage on the campus of Pilgrim Haven. And so fine, and Dick was down there, and I forget what else we were celebrating, some event that we had, so we were going to be there anyway. Right. And we went into his home, and he was there with his wife, and they had been married. You got a ways to go to catch your dad and mom. I think they were like in their 67th.
We're going to catch up with them.
All right. He just, we sat down, and he just started talking to me. And I'm waiting to figure out, why am I here? You know, he asked for this meeting. And he just tells me about his life and things that he's done and what he's enjoyed and all this. And then as I listened to the story, it all came together for me, what he was wanting me to see. I call it the golden thread. In my words, not his. But it starts with, and I've asked Gordon to correct me on some of the dates and places because my memory's a little fuzzy on all of these. But in general, this will be factual. And more important is the story behind it. That he started off as a young man, as a pastor. He always had a business. He didn't say this, but obviously, and he had a business side, a sense to him that was recognized by others. So he was always involved, as was said, in some kind of building project, some kind of business adventure, besides being a pastor. But it's tough to make ends meet, maybe now as well as then, as a pastor. So one of his schemes was he joined the Army Reserves to be a chaplain and get some extra income. And that was a good decision, except it was bad timing, because World War II came along, and he was called to active duty. And that, as I understand it, was not just a chaplain. He was in charge of many other chaplains, which involved a lot of plane travel, which unfortunately led to he was involved in a crash, which badly injured his foot. And he couldn't get rehabilitated, so they discharged him and gave him a pension from the Army for doing that. And I can see in your eyes, you're doing what I was doing at that point. Well, why are you telling me this story? I was looking at Harold. Okay, I was in the service, that's fine. So we went back to work, and I think was down in Phoenix, you said, and then, as you mentioned, moved up north and had connections with this Pilgrim Haven thing going on. And over time, they got into financial difficulty and called him up and said, we need you to come back and run Pilgrim Haven, and we can't pay you. And he said, because I had a medical pension from the service, I was able to say yes to that call and went there. And then he began to visit Wall Street and say, I got this great idea, and I want to develop more of these communities and expand this idea. And I said, it is a great idea, but you don't have any money, and we're not going to give you any. But he became well known on Wall Street for asking all the time. And I think, Dick, there was you told me a Methodist lady?
Methodist lady.
I thought it was Presbyterian, darn it, but it was Methodist.
Methodist, yeah. She gave $1.8 million to the Board of National Ministries to help build and finance and operate retirement communities.
Which gave Harold some money to say to the bankers, now we have some money to work with. And that was the beginning of, I think, Grand Lake Gardens and Piedmont Gardens and some others that was used.
Grand Lake, Pilgrim Haven, and San Joaquin.
There you go. And when he got all done, I said, okay, I get it. I see what's happened here. He wanted me to see that what I was involved in is much bigger than any person, himself included. And that there is a thread that binds this all together, and if you look for it, you'll see whether it's getting the board up on the stage to fill in for whether the government's here or financial difficulties. And I want to add my own tie to that is when I first got here, the challenge, as we said, was the Terraces of Los Gatos. And the financing had been done for good reasons, recourse to the corporation. That meant Abhau's other assets and its revenue stood behind the development of the Terraces of Los Gatos. Unfortunately, due to many, many factors, I think we sold it out, you said 3 times? The numbers of units, I think?
Because of the long time it took to open.
Right. So it wasn't that there wasn't a market there and that we couldn't make the sales. It was that we could not get it completed. We could not get the approvals that were necessary. It just went on and on. And in that financing that we stood behind was a requirement to make a series of balloon payments tied to dates, not to actual performance. So here we had resident deposits that the state of California would not let us touch because we hadn't reached certain milestone events. Yet we had these multi-million-dollar balloon payments coming. And the first couple were paid by scraping together money from various funds. The second to last one, we took the money that was an operating reserve that we had borrowed to get it through the operating loss period and used that money. And then pretty much we were out of tricks. And I had joined, by this time, a men's group at our church, and I was sharing with them one morning about, I just couldn't come up with a solution to this, and they looked at me and they said, well, have you tried praying about this? Novel idea. I said, well, no, God's busy and this is my job. And they said, well, come on, let's pray about it right now. And they got very specific and said what they were asking for. And 2 days later, I kid you not, 2 days later the phone rings. And we've had stories yesterday of angels with checkbooks. Dick has one of the Yule, Mr. Yule is an angel with a checkbook. This guy had a relationship with investment bankers, and he said, what I do is monetize reserves of not-for-profit hospitals. And I see you're a big not-for-profit. I wonder if you've got reserves you're paying any attention to. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, most people borrow these monies, they're restricted. They can't have positive arbitrage. They can't earn more than you're paying. So most people take that money, stick it in some fixed asset, and I'll take a look at it and tell you whether I can sell the future interest earnings on that for a present value payment today. So he looked at our reserves, and he said, we can do this deal. And what am I going to get for this? What will the company get? He said, well, can't tell you because it depends on the day that you do it. You know, the market goes up and down. It's just going to vary. We don't really know. So naively, I called the state of California, who had insured our bonds, and through Cal Mortgage, and said, I have this opportunity. I want to do this. And they said, oh, you can't do that. Why not? Because we just tell you that you can't do it. And I got outside counsel advice, and we're back and forth, back and forth. Finally decided, okay, it's time to pull the trigger. I'm just going to do it. And the day that we picked to do it, going back a year was the highest day in the market to do it, and going forward for a year was the highest day in the market to do it. And Pam is in the room, so she'll want me to be exact in this, but just bear with me, Pam. This is a CEO kind of story. We needed something like $7.125 million. And when we got the notice from the banks or the investment that they had sold this to Lehman Brothers, I think.
Yeah, it was Lehman.
Yeah. What do you think we got? $7.125 million. Wow. And I said, if that's not a golden thread, I don't know one. So many examples in our history if we look for that, but it's the kind of thing working for ABHOW that just gets you excited. And I said, I will never take personal credit for that. I will always give the glory where it belongs.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you to each of you for sharing this wonderful story.